All right. So, welcome everybody. Thanks for coming. Uh, Tonight, we're going to be talking about mindfulness of thoughts. And before we get into it, I want to invite you to just become aware of your body sitting in the chair, whether your eyes are, it's really helpful to have them open and just become aware of the sensations right now. Maybe the pressure of your weight on the chair, the flatness of your feet on the floor, and see if you can just keep a little bit of attention into that. That kind of pulls a little bit of consciousness away from the chatter that goes on. And it'll really help with the attention and the retention of what we're talking about. So, mindfulness of thoughts. So, when we talk about this, the first question is, what are thoughts? What are they? And if we were to look at that in kind of a scientific, view, we'd take a bunch of different definitions and kind of compress them down. Thoughts are a collection, or at least the biological imprint is a collection of neurons firing together, millions of neurons at a time in a map-like form that are just firing in these patterns. And these patterns are corresponding to the five senses or to other thoughts. That's kind of a summation of that. And some other science that's a little bit more recent is the fact we're having 6,200 a day, with the majority of them can be, critical or repetitive, as we've talked about before. What I'd like to do for this next segment is, as we go into thoughts, I want to switch from a scientific perspective and really get into first person perspective. What it's like to be a human and have thoughts. And to stop and let's look at this in a first person perspective. So I'm just going to go over some bullet points of first person perspective from this. So the first thing is, where do they come from? Like for me, and most of this is obviously going to be about me, is I'm just sitting here and thoughts come from nowhere. They seem so important and boom, they're gone to nowhere. And as we meditate, we start to see this characteristic. They're fleeting. That's another characteristic. You couldn't hold on to a thought technically if you tried. You can't grab it, bring it closer. You can't make it stay. It has to reappear. They're all over the place. My thoughts are all over the place. And, if you put a loudspeaker on my neck and you got to hear every thought, I'd be in big trouble socially. I mean, they definitely need a filter, because I have some crazy thoughts, and some thoughts that are, of course, very inappropriate. So they're just kind of random all over the place at times. Another characteristic I've noticed of my thinking is it's very unreliable. Some of my thoughts are accurate, some are not accurate. Some I can't even retrieve when I want to. Not reliable. I think probably the most frustrating characteristic of thoughts is there's not really an easy on-off button. I can't seem to turn these off. I mean, I think if we could figure out an instant way to turn them off, we'd change humanity. Another characteristic is I don't have a clue what my next thought is going to be. Just boom, boom, boom. If you look at it, doesn't seem to make itself known until it's known, and I have no idea what's going to come up next. Which leads me to the next point. We don't actually choose our thoughts. So I'm going to elaborate on this one a little more and work this like I do with a client in one-on-one sessions. So right now, think of a car, a food, and a color. So give me the name of, not out loud, of a car, a food, and a color. So probably think like Toyota, tacos, blue. All right, cool. So to preface this, we know the brain projects the invisible mind here. And I'm not concerned with why you chose what you chose, really concerned with how. So when I say, give me the name of a car, did your brain put down or offer up every single make and model you know, and you chose it? Did it go Audi, BMW, Chevrolet, blah, 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 get all the way through the cars? And I go, Toyota. That's my thought. Or did you notice that when I said, give me the name of a car, maybe one or two popped up and you chose it and you said, Toyota. All right, cool. Think how many foods do you know? Did whatever food did chicken McNuggets or filet mignon or spaghetti, did they even enter when I thought, let me think of a food? Oh, taco just popped in my head, and I said it. Just appears. Same with the color. So kind of look at this. Are you actually choosing your thoughts, or are they just appearing? They're just popping in. It's kind of interesting. Which really kind of leads into the next point when I say that, we're not actually thinking. Thinking is occurring to us. The part that feels like me is not actually choosing my thoughts. I'm not the one that's necessarily thinking. I'm this conscious awareness. I've been me way before I had the ability for language and thought. And now thoughts just appear. The part that feels like me, this awareness, does it feel, think about this, does it feel like you're beating your heart? Does it feel like the part that is you is actually taking an active part in beating your heart, or breathing the air into your lungs, or adjusting the liver enzymes and, etc.? It's kind of the nature of thoughts too. They're just going on their own. I really can't stop them. And it's really an interesting perspective to look at that I'm not thinking. Thinking is occurring to me. That I'm in this strange relationship, and we all are, that I've always been, where I've kind of never backed up to see that. I'm just like, somebody asked me something, oh, I was thinking this. But really, the neural processes are happening below our conscious aware. But like if I were to draw a line and say, this is the conscious awareness line, the neural processes are happening here, and then they pop up above that line. And the science says that we're having several that don't even pop up above that line, and we're not conscious of all of our thoughts. So they're happening here and up above, and then I go, oh, taco, oh, Toyota. But technically, I didn't choose those, and I'm not involved in the neural processes that are offering up those thoughts. So thinking is actually just occurring to us. It's rather interesting. Let that sink in for a second. Then there's another characteristic. Thoughts are not, I like to think they're not so innocent. I'm not just having just a bunch of thoughts that don't have any implication. We start to become really mindful in meditation. One of the things you're going to notice pretty soon is that thoughts have an emotional link, right? The cerebral cortex, both the left and the right hemisphere, share equal amount of neurons in the limbic system. So each thought has a slight feeling attached to it. They may not be overwhelming, but they could be, when you get really into this practice, you'll feel either the contraction or the expansion, these emotional reactions that are associated with thoughts. I like to sometimes think of it as like the stage of awareness, boom, down plops a thought onto that, and instantly there's a shadow. If it's a well-lit stage, there's instantly an emotion tagged to it. Sometimes major, sometimes not. But it's really interesting to see that. So many of my thoughts are negative. So many. And to really kind of understand, I'm just going to briefly touch on why this is. This is a tale of two hemispheres. Of the left hemisphere that is responsible for the neuro-linguistic is also responsible for the past and the future. The right hemisphere is responsible for the now. It's responsible for a lot of things we associate with spirituality: love, compassion, empathy. Um, and knowing that the neuro-linguistic part, I think in language. It's a crazy characteristic too, that I'm thinking in language. Basically, the majority of our lives are very left hemisphere conceptual. This is how we relate. This is how most of our lives are in the left hemisphere, which when my thinking goes, I'll speak in my patterns. When my thinking goes to the future, I'm projecting into, into the future what might happen. And it never seems to, the majority of the time, I'll just say, it seems to come up with things that aren't going to quite work out right. That seems to be a common characteristic. Or when I'm recalling stuff, I'm recalling things that didn't quite work out right. So I'm in this past and future, which is left hemisphere associated. And the neuro linguistic part is associated there too in the left hemisphere. And so activating this, I'm continually having these thoughts that have these emotions, which leads to the next point. Most anxiety and depression being thought based, left hemisphere. The future not quite working out, and then we end up ruminating over and over. We feel a certain way and we think, and that causes another feeling and thinking, or the past. We're recalling stuff and we can't let go of it, and it gets us down, and that can start a depressive little episode here, and if it carries on all day, all week, all month, that's what we call depression. That's the predominant state. So it's really crazy to think anxiety and depression are based basically in illusion. Not The feelings are real, incredibly real, right? But they're coming from a thought, a perception, right? And the perception can be accurate or inaccurate. Think of how many times you thought of something was inaccurate, but the emotion there is right on. The emotions are just corresponding to the perception. I painted a pretty bleak picture there, but there's hope. There's definitely hope, because you are not your thoughts. You were you long before the thinking process, and you will be you if you get Alzheimer's or senile after the thinking process isn't working so well. When you see a newborn baby, they're fully conscious. They're fully themselves way before, that whole first year, second year, before that language is down, before they're really thinking and that neuro linguistic part is firing. They're thinking, they remember where grandma hid the cookies and stuff. Things weren't just completely absent before, 5 years old, I believe, when our hippocampus develops enough that, we start the type of relationship we have now with memory and thoughts. But so I say that just to illustrate there is this state of being, this conscious awareness that is separate from thoughts, but they're very much merged together. Mindfulness is this state of mind where we really start to experience, the difference between consciousness and thoughts. So let's sink in for a second. Make sure you're keeping some of your attention in your body, like we talked about earlier. So mindfulness is an experiential way of discovering this. The other way would be what we're doing now, a conceptual way, left hemisphere way. We want to do this in an experiential way, because the concept is not really going to help us. It's not going to help us in this moment-to-moment thing we call life. To illustrate this, I like to talk about a map. A map is a concept. No matter how detailed that map is, that map will never change your location. It's a concept. We have to do the experience of walking or driving in order to change our location. The conceptual is very important, because if you marry the conceptual with the experiential, you start driving with the map, you're going to get somewhere pretty quick. So, mindfulness. This is where the magic happens experientially. And we develop mindfulness inside of meditation, right? When we meditate, we're actually sitting down and we're developing this capacity, this state of consciousness that we call mindfulness. And it doesn't change the thinking per se. What it actually does is it changes our relationship to the thinking, which is really important to understand. And let that sink in for a second. We're not changing the thoughts, we're changing our relationship to the thoughts. Sometimes I give and I don't know if I did in the previous videos where I talk about the movie theater example, and I'll do a little bit more of that next week. But when I talk about like having a young child in in a scary movie next to me, and that child is completely identified with the contents of that screen, that identification, that child has no idea he's in a movie theater, right? His relationship to the screen is completely different than the adults. I'm not going to get as scared as that child. I'm not going to go through the same process as he would do if he's completely frightened by a movie, because my relationship as an adult with that movie screen is completely different. But I can lose myself in that movie. And that brings up the next point. I have to introduce the concept here of identification. What does that mean? So, identification is a term that we use to describe how what we are as conscious awareness becomes identical to what it's aware of. Like we become the thought. There feels like there is no separation between me and the thoughts that are appearing. This leads into the problem then, where I'm thinking without knowing I'm thinking. Why is this a problem? Well, it's not a problem if your life's just going great and your thoughts are wonderful and you're pretty happy with all your psychological patterns. It's really not a problem. But the things that we're not happy with in our lives are, they're coming to us through thoughts, the majority of them. This is how our patterns emerge. And some of you might have lived a life that you've either long enough, or in my case, I've lived a life where trying to battle addiction, I've changed everything, changed the jobs, the state, the friends, everything. And yet the same patterns keep emerging. My same problems with work keep emerging. My same problems, in dating or something keep emerging. My same patterns keep emerging. This is the cause and effect. Sometimes referred to in the East as karma. This is cause and effect. You know. So mindfulness creates the state of consciousness where I'm seeing the narrative as opposed to being the narrative, right? Which, when I'm seeing the narrative, it feels like I have this sacred pause. I can respond rather than when I'm thinking without knowing I'm thinking, I just react. In the majority of our lives, we're just thinking without knowing we're thinking, and this sacred pause is one of the things that this mindfulness of thoughts and mindfulness in general allows us to develop, where gives us the capacity to respond, to have that pause and go, oh, that's a thought. Oh, this is my feelings. And then I can choose to alter it. That's how I break, and how in my life I've broken those patterns. As they come up, as I see what I would normally do, and take a breath and then go, you know what? And be conscious of it, because thinking's not the problem. It's not. It's this thinking without knowing we're thinking. This identification with thought is where our patterns emerge. So meditation is how we develop this. And just a brief review of like what we've talked about. What we're doing in meditation is, I talked about the left hemisphere, this chatter, right? We're activating the right hemisphere through tactile sensations. We're feeling the breath, we're feeling this really deeply. We're feeling everything expand and contract. We're pulling awareness away from this hemisphere and over here. And still, the thoughts are going to come up, let's say in the periphery, so to speak, that even though I'm feeling and expanding, thoughts are arising and they're passing. And that's cool. We just allow in this vipassana, this mindfulness practice, we just allow it to come and go, with thoughts and sensations and sounds and taste and smells, any of the senses. We're just allowing it to go, but we're really staying anchored in this right hemisphere, this feeling of the breath, or really feeling of any five senses. But the most common anchor is the breath, because it's always with us. Then what happens, even if we're using a concentration method, like I've taught you, the feel on the in breath and counting on the out breath, I recommend that as just temporary. We do it for a few weeks, and I still would do it at the beginning of a meditation just to establish a little concentration. Then we drop that. And it's kind of important that we do drop it, because it's keeping a part of that hemisphere activated with the barking out, the feel, and the count. So what's going to happen in a few minutes or moments is a certain thought's going to pop up that has an emotional content to it, and boom, identification happens. And what I've noticed in my practice is that it seems very much biological. It feels like we are wired, we're not wired to gaze at the beauty of a flower while a tiger walks up behind us. There's a part of us that's constantly scanning. So as soon as the thought, rises on the horizon that gets me, I'm going to turn towards it, and I'm boom, suddenly thinking and in a conversation when I had no intention of doing that. I was going to be meditating and feeling my breath. And now, let's just say, for example, I'm feeling and I'm counting, I'm feeling, and then the thought pops up, oh, is my boss mad at me? Oh, shit. Next time I talk to him, I need to say this. I need to blah, 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 blah. And then somewhere in that process, consciousness burns through, and I realize, oh, I'm supposed to be meditating. And at that point, I return back to the breath. No judgment, non-judgmentally. That's an important thing to point out here. Judgment is just more ego coming in the back door, more left hemisphere. No praise, no judgment, just return back to the breath. And that's really the magic. I'm limited conceptually what I can tell you about this. But for those of you that have practiced this and seen this, you'll see that words can't really encapsulate the magic that can happen over this process. That seeing it versus being it, because this is where you can really make some changes in your life. And it takes repetition, 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 repetition. Yeah. All right. So that's kind of just a brief talk on mindfulness of thoughts, right? And I'm keeping it very secular. I'm not getting into the Eastern origins of mindfulness of thoughts. I just want to keep this really surface and and accessible. So to kind of summarize it, in different words, hopefully we've been in a certain relationship with thoughts probably since around that 5 years old. It seems around that age. We've just been in this relationship. It's very functional, it's very useful. This is how things progress. But when there's suffering in our lives and we want to undo it, this is one of the most effective ways to get in and notice how the suffering arises. It arises through our psychological patterns. And when we change this relationship with the thoughts, we can really change the patterns, when we can make some effect on our suffering. And I don't mean major suffering. I just mean anxiety and depression, worry, that kind of stuff. And the effects are profound eventually. It may not be at first. There may be some really cool aha moments at first when we suddenly realize how this is unfolding in our psyche, this seeing it versus being it. But trust me, this is something experiential. My conceptual relating of this process does not do it justice. This is just because these are concepts, and you're having to rely on what you think I'm saying if you haven't had this experience. So that is why we do this, mindfulness in an experiential manner. That's why we have to meditate. And then after we meditate, when we take it off of the cushion and we become mindful of our thoughts all throughout the day, that's what we call mindfulness. So like to open it up for questions and answers right now. See if anybody has any questions. Don't be shy. Just unmute yourselves if you do.
Hey, Chris. This is Sophie.
Hey,
I have a quick question. Does meditating ever feel or start to feel good? I think in my practice so far, it's felt either neutral or, it's sometimes frustrating, which I think is normal. But I'm wondering, what does the end goal look like?
yeah, it's a great question. It can feel however it feels. I would say one of the big traps is when we start to experience, let's say, a meditation where there's a lot of bliss, then we label that, oh, that's a great meditation. And that's, and then we have another meditation and it's not so blissful, it's chaotic. And we go, oh, that's a bad meditation. And those aren't accurate, right? So it really just depends on what comes up. And remember, the goal here is not to feel a certain way. The goal, meditation, is an investigation into this present moment and into the nature of our mind. And we're developing this capacity to return to the breath, going from the left hemisphere to the right hemisphere, and really changing that relationship with thoughts. It's almost as if when the thoughts are put out in front of you, things change. And now, since we don't necessarily choose our thoughts, there is a little bit of wiggle room, but we don't get to choose what comes up. We can exercise, it makes us feel better. But so some days you're going to feel good in meditation, other days you're not, but just understand that's a part of it. Does that answer your question a little? Because I know
It
you
does.
asked what's the end goal. The end
No,
goal is
I like that
mindfulness.
answer.
Yeah.
I
Okay.
like that answer. It is what it is.
Yeah. Cool. Anybody else? We have time for a couple more. Anybody have?
Hey, Chris.
Yes.
So you were mentioning that at a certain point after a few weeks to stop actually saying the word feel and counting. I'm not sure if you're going to get into this later, but is there either something that you replace it with, or is it just you're in that sensation and getting back to just the feeling in your body, the felt sense, or is it something different?
Yes. Yeah. Great question. All right. So Judson Brewer is one of my scientific heroes in the mindfulness world, and does a lot of work in fMRIs and different ways of scanning the brain. And these processes are incredibly expensive. And what they've noticed, and this was kind of new, this is about a couple of years old. There's a part of the brain, the posterior cingulate cortex, and that is where the sense of self is associated with. It's not another left hemisphere associated thing. And as we're going feel, count, feel, they notice that these concentration messes were keeping that lit up. So what I do with my clients, and in the beginning, I will use it, and I'll do it today on the meditation. We will use feel and count until things seem to settle down a bit. Then we drop it. And what I've always encouraged is really just let the sound of the breath, the feeling of the breath, remind you to feel. Almost if we could just drop the word and merge with the breath, because we know that it's all about feeling, just feeling, and just feeling it expand and contract. And that allows for more of the periphery of thoughts and feelings, everything in the five senses to come in the periphery as we're just expanding and contracting. But in the beginning, when we go to sit down to meditate and we've been talking and moving all day long, there's a certain momentum to the mind. And we're just so easily pulled that it's really skillful to try to give the mind something to chew on for a few moments as we're really activating that right hemisphere and things are starting to calm down. Then as we go deeper, we just want to drop that if we can. So, and if you drop it and the mind's just constantly, you're identified, constantly thinking and talking to the thoughts, pick it back up. But eventually, you'll find your way into being able to drop it and just expand and contract with the breath. And, the part of this process is just allowing whatever comes up to come up. The identification is not per se a problem. That's expected. That is what is supposed to happen. And then we just return back to the breath. So does that answer it for you, Josh?
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, and I noticed that in some of my meditations where I've almost forgotten to say the words and then just noticed that I was in that felt sense. And so yeah, so that helps a lot.
Let's see. Does anybody else have any questions?
Hey, Chris, this is Blake.
Hey, Blake.
So you've been having us meditate and kind of tie this into an activity like our coffee in the morning, I know you said like we're meditating like this to get the repetition in and get better at it. But is there going to be a time when we use this meditation as a tool for a specific topic or an issue? I know a few times I'll get overwhelmed when I have something to do and I'll start procrastinating. And so lately what I've done is I've gone ahead and meditated to, I guess, kind of clear the cobwebs or the anxiety in my head to get me past over the hump so I can just get up and start doing my activity versus, just procrastinating and worrying about it. So is that one of the goals that we're working towards, is actually use this as a topical tool?
Great question. So one of the characteristics of the right hemisphere, which is mainly what we're doing in lots of these spiritual practices, one of the characteristics is this big picture. There's a lot of intuitive knowledge in the big picture. And so when we're caught up in the details of what's going to go wrong, what do I need to do? We're really left hemisphere focused. As we go and meditate, and we just in the silence, it's almost, Einstein says, is the quote of Einstein, hopefully a real one, I'm pretty sure it is, that his best answers came to him in the silence. The next morning after sleep, he would have the answers, and really what we're trying to do, activate the right hemisphere. And, a lot of people report in lots of different ways that it's, they feel refreshed and they see it and they see their problem in a different angle, but we do know that the right hemisphere is associated with the big picture, a different way of looking at things. So, and there's all kinds of meditations out there. Meditation is as ambiguous as the word exercise. Jumping jacks are exercise, and so are, squats and deadlifts. So there's a lot of different types you can do. This is called Vipassana insight, mindfulness meditation. And this right here is a certain type of a training of our awareness, constantly training, getting lost in the left and coming back and activating, and hopefully balancing out the amount of attention going to each hemisphere.
So how do we know if it's working? Like, what's something concrete that I know that I can see, say, hey, this is actually working towards my goal of being more mindful?
Sure. The next time something happens and you notice your thought about it, or you notice a thought that arises that used to ruin your day or get you mad, and you actually notice it comes out in front of you and you see, oh, wow, like that's it. When you start to notice the pause, that's how you'll start to notice the progress, right? Is it, this is about the patterns. I notice stuff all the time. I notice when things that used to really piss me off or anger me, and they arise and I feel it, and then I'm like, oh, and that, with lots and lots of training, you notice it. And I notice that clench comes in and it just wakes me up. I've returned to the breath and I'm like, oh, wow, there. And at that point, I can respond differently rather than just doing the same old shit I've always done and indulging that same pattern. So basically, when you start becoming more mindful of thoughts, that's kind of the goal right here, at least of this part, and because it starts as a thought and an emotion, and it just gets in this think feel cycle, and and then we're act upon it, and but it all starts, usually with the thought. Does that help, Blake?
Yeah, and actually, I think it might be working.
Cool. Yeah, you start seeing results pretty quick. That's awesome. That makes me really happy. Yeah. Yeah. And there's just something magical about seeing something that used to control you and not allowing it to control you, and the more and more, remember, I know this number doesn't have a lot of meaning to us as humans, the number 6,200, because that's just way beyond what we can grasp. But that's what we're doing. The latest science says that many thoughts in our 16-hour window. So if we can start chipping away at that, we'll really be making progress. So
Thanks.
thank you. Good question.
Hey, Chris. So this is like a kind of a three-part question. So,
Okay.
so part number one is you just talked about like identification, and I often find that when I or I imagine that I would need to tap into mindfulness or meditation, when those situations arise, usually I'm too deep into my somatic responses to for my brain to properly like interject that I need to like work on actually executing the mindfulness behavior. I'm like, I've always been most successful when I've had people around me that can identify that I'm lost in my somatic symptoms. And then they're like, hey, like, where'd you go? Like, come back. And then when somebody says, come back, and I realize that I've like sort of, I mean, I struggle with dissociation and PTSDs, but like when somebody says that, I come back, and then that to me, that cues up like, oh, hey, like, where did I go? What were my thought patterns? But like, if it's just me, especially if I'm by myself and I'm just in it, and I don't know necessarily how to strengthen whatever it is that I need to tell me to
Sure.
to snap out of it, as it were. I mean, that's slightly insensitive, but just like,
Sure.
hey, like you're lost. Where did you go? Like, you're just totally, enraptured with whatever is happening in my head.
It's a great question. And that's really, Yoshi, that's real life stuff there. The formula is so simple, it's insulting to our intellect here. I learned this years and years ago, and it has been so helpful. I got it from Eckhart Tolle in the very beginning, but I've heard it said thousands of different ways. But anything that's not peace, ease, or lightness in my body, wake up right then. So the moment I feel that contraction, the moment I feel that anger, and just reverse engineer it from there. Just find out what that was associated with. As that contraction comes, what's the thought or the perception and the thought about the perception that led to that? It's kind of, I don't know if you're old enough. We used to call them idiot lights on our dash, but that tension should be the light that comes on that lets you just blew your engine. That's what we used to call them, idiot lights. Your engine's dead. As soon as I feel that contraction, that's one of my biggest signals right there. When I've lost that peace, the moment I realize that, take a breath and reverse engineer it and put it out in front of you. And at that moment, you're in the middle of it already, so you're not going to think away that emotion. That's not going to happen. So the moment we realize we're contracted, we wake up, we tend to the emotion, we reverse engineer, and we look at, oh, that's related to this perception. And then Byron Katie has some really interesting stuff she calls the work, but it's basically like a truth finding mission, and you just need to ask yourself, is this true? Is this really true? Do I know this to be true? Is this, an ultimate truth? And a lot of times you'll find out, I don't really know that, because like I said, most of the time we're thinking on automatic mode and we're in that left hemisphere, something's going to go wrong. Oh no, it's as if it was really happening. That's the part that's just so insane about this simulation software of emotions, projected into the future. We contract over something that's not happening in the room. And just, the moment we feel that contraction of those somatic responses, that's the beautiful invitation to wake up, reverse engineer it, and tend to the contraction or the emotion, if you will. Is that helpful, Yoshi? Did that answer that?
Yeah, to a degree. And then I suppose the second part of the question is when I do sit down and very intentionally try to engage in mindfulness and meditation, I find that my headspace can actually trend towards whatever my predilection is towards anxiety and despair. And so it's almost like, it almost feels like on one hand, I'm like giving myself props, like, yeah, I'm doing my meditation. But on the other hand, it almost just feels like I can't quite angle in my experience. And then it's almost like too much time in my own head, if that makes sense, to where I can
Yeah.
almost like, if I wasn't living in my patterns, that sometimes it feels like it can almost cause me to start living in those patterns again.
Exactly. So let me clarify this just to, maybe I haven't made this real clear. The that whole process, right, is really taking conscious awareness and taking that, and it contracts down, and we call that attention. And that attention is on the sensation of expansion and contraction. Now the thoughts are here in the periphery, but they just arise, and they usually don't have too much emotional. But man, when I put them in the front, that's there, the emotions there, that's there. And that's the part, that identification with thinking, that once we realize that's happening, the 100%, the moment you realize it, just return back, no judgment, and put the attention on the sensations. Allow that to expand, and then they'll start coming up again, right? But it's this subtle thing about when we're here and it's in the periphery versus when we're completely identified with it and thinking without knowing we're thinking and talking. That's a part of the meditation that's really crucial, because that's what's happening all day. And then trust me, it may be, a moment, it may be a minute or so, but consciousness seems to burn through, and you're like, oh, I'm supposed to be meditating. And at that moment, you return to the breath. That's it. That's not failure. I always like to say that's one complete rep on the bench press. That's exactly what is supposed to be happening, especially in these early stages. And we just want just countless times, return to the breath, return to the breath, return to the breath, return to the breath, because we're strengthening this muscle and awareness that, honestly, Yoshi, there's no such thing. Meditation is just a word for it. We're just being quiet for 20 minutes, sitting down, investigating the nature of mind, and working on this return response from being lost and identified with thoughts back to being present. Thank you so much
Thank
for the
you.
question. Thank you. All right, let's go into the meditation part of the meditation part. So find a comfortable spot. Get a timer here. I might go just a bit. All right. Hit start there. All right, let's close our eyes. Our spine straight. Spine straight. The chin tucked in slightly. If we put our tongue gently at the roof of our mouth behind the top teeth, that'll allow the air to go in through the nose and out through the nose without thinking about it. And if you want to use the feel and the count, and just listen to my voice in the periphery, feel free in this section. Really become aware of the sensations right now that let you know you have a body. Right now, can you feel the pressure of your body making contact with the earth or your feet? Really feel the breath expand and contract, and see if you can marry it with that sensation, that pressure, or whatever sensation, that flatness, and allow that to just gently expand and contract with your breath. Notice maybe the bending in the legs or the heaviness of your forearms on the lap. Maybe tingling in the fingertips is something I feel. Just notice the energy of the mind in the periphery right now. And just feel the expansion, feel the contraction. Feel the belly. Maybe you can feel the chest rising with the breath, the arms and the shoulders. Just notice these sensations and try to add them to a composite of sensations in your body. Just feel everything expanding and contracting. Feel the neck, back of the head, maybe the jaw, maybe the air at the tip of your nose. You might find some tension somewhere in the body. Don't judge that. Just see if you can hold it in a soft manner. If you're doing the counting and you get to 10, just start over. If you get pulled into thinking, just return and start over. Really follow that breath from its inception to the full belly, to the exhale, to its completion. You have the rest of the night to think about stuff and to talk. Just right now, we're investigating the nature of mind. Notice if you can feel the energy of the mind as it starts to slow down. Just really feel. Turn up the brightness, the sensitivity, the volume of these sensations. The aliveness of the skin, the air making contact with it. It's really coming into being. Just really merge with that breath, with whatever you're using as an anchor. Just notice the nature of these thoughts as they arise. It's really centered on feeling, maybe the feeling and the counting, if you're using that tool. If you want to try to drop it now, try to drop it. Just merge with the breath and the sensations. Feel everything, just the patterns of energy that are expanding and contracting. And if you haven't noticed it yet, notice how when the thoughts come up, how they can beg our attention. But don't judge, just allow it to be there. Just holding on to the breath through feeling, really holding on. This allows us to notice the nature of these thoughts in the periphery of our awareness. Notice the space, they're just arising in this open space. So like the blackness, the blotchy colors in our visual field. The sounds, the ambient sounds around, the sound of our breath, the taste in our mouth, the smells. Really feeling, continually feeling everything expand and contract. If you're getting pulled into thought, the moment you realize it, just return. Exactly what's supposed to happen. Just feel, feel, feel. See if you can notice how that thought just comes from nowhere, just disappears. Notice how we don't choose it. It just appears on this stage of awareness. If you can notice these thoughts as just appearances in consciousness, appearances in awareness, no different than the appearance of the sensations, the sight, the smells, the sounds. Just back up into this awareness and notice all that's arising and passing. As we merge with our anchor, expanding and contracting. Get lost, just return, just feel, feel, feel. Turn up that sensitivity. Connected to several sensations in the body. Just let that body become alive with sensations, expanding and contracting. As the mind chatters in the distance, the sounds arise and pass. Thoughts arising without any of your effort, disappearing without any of your effort. And here you remain. If there's any urge to move, just notice that. Notice how it pulls you. Don't respond, just notice. This is where we start to notice the patterns of thoughts, types of thoughts, the nature. We can notice their relationship to feelings, emotions. Notice how the mind can jump in and worry about when this is going to be over or I need to move. Just notice that. Notice the nature. Holding steady with our anchor through feeling, just really deeply feeling the sensations. Expand and contract with the breath. Notice when we really feel these sensations and they merge with this anchor, it feels like it puts distance between us and our thoughts. There's some change in the relationship to the thoughts. Really notice that. Here we are aware, silent. That thought comes out of nowhere, begs our attention, maybe gets it, and we're just really deep in it. It creates a reality. We realize it, we return back to the breath. We just really want to experientially develop this and notice the nature of these thoughts. And notice this wide open, expansive feeling, the stage of awareness these thoughts are entering into and disappearing from. Just really, really feel. The last minute, I want you to just drop everything and really feel the sensations. Feel that breath from the beginning to the end. All right. Before you open your eyes, notice the stillness you've cultivated if you're able to. And when we open our eyes and the world comes rushing back in, I'd invite you to keep just one foot in this ultimate reality as we put one foot back in the relative world so that we can pivot back and forth, so that we can capture the stillness in a breath, in a moment, the state of being, the state of consciousness. And then go ahead and open your eyes when you're ready. And congratulations, you just did 15 minutes of meditation. All right. All right, well, that's the conclusion of this week of mindfulness on thoughts and the meditation, focusing on it. All right, Farron, we can stop the recording.